Hello, everyone. Welcome. I just broke my lamp. I'm sad. They're kind of cheap lamps, but I have a little Uzi Vert lamp back there for every stream. It's a light up, like glowing lamp that you can adjust the colors on. And then I have a Minnesota Viking lamp. But when I was plugging the Minnesota Viking lamp in, the plug-in broke. It snapped. I'm kind of sad. I love that lamp that I got for like $20 on eBay. Oh, well. I also got my brother one for Christmas, so maybe I'll just steal his. How's everybody doing? Good morning, comrades. Hey, Garden State. Just quit my crappy job that hasn't given me a raise in 4 years. Wow. Only got raises because the minimum wage has gone up, but no real incentive, and I'm feeling great. For sure. You need a new job. I mean, like, not to say you need to go get a job now, but like you need to get paid more, right? If you're making minimum wage in this economy with inflation the way it is, screw that, man. I'm glad you're feeling great. You need more wages than that to survive. Glad you left. Finally, I get to see a stream live. Let's go. You bet. That's why I try to do it early in the morning. Usually this is my running time, but I worked out 3 times yesterday. So I'm taking the morning off from working out. I say that, but as soon as the stream is over, I'll probably run. And then tonight I'll probably wrestle or run again or lift. So I'll probably end up working out twice again because I'm a psycho. But hello, nice emote there. Twitch subscribers, love it. Hello, Bjork the Pessimist. Good morning. Hey, Papa Squats, how you doing? Hey, everyone. First time caught the stream. Exactly on time, you bet. Your Discord is kind of messed up, my guy. You just noticing that, Papa Squats? No, actually, I keep having people reach out and say that because we're finally running the Discord now. We're finally managing it. But you have no idea how messed up it has been before this week. Like, this week, it's finally under control. This week, we're finally taking steps to control the Discord. Previously, the Discord was the Wild West. And join our Discord at the Midwestern Marks link tree. I think it's in the link tree. I don't know. We haven't been inviting a lot of people to the Discord because we're getting it under control. But let me tell you what, it was out of control. Never, ever create a Discord and tell thousands of people to join it without having any moderators or rules or without ever checking it. It won't work. From one psycho to another. Thank you, Ross. Really appreciate it. 10 euros. Ross, I wish I could give you an award for being the most consistent super chatter because you and Sam Dixon, I think, maybe David Burney too, but I saw someone call themselves a Nazbol in it. Yeah, we're working on getting rid of all those people. Like, right now, it's going to take some time because what we're doing is, we want an ideologically diverse community. We want people to feel like they can come into our Discord and share their ideas and criticize other ideas or, talk about these things. But, we don't want any Nazbols. We don't want any, actual fascists. We don't want anybody who's there just to wreak havoc. We don't want anybody who's extremely disrespectful in how they go about debating. So it's like finding the people who just have some, socially conservative opinions, that they can discuss respectfully versus the people who are straight up I'm a Nazbol. Okay, sure you are. It's just a 15-year-old trying to be edgy, but trying to get rid of all that. I bet you by the end of this weekend or by the end of next week at least, the Discord will be a fun place to hang out. Actually, I give you my word as the Midwestern Marks co-founder that we will get Discord figured out by the end of the week, and it'll be a more fun place to be. Thanks again, Ross. Really appreciate it. Got the photons in your eye today? I did. Actually, I was outside getting the photons in my eyes at about 7, And one of my best buddies, Brock, rolled up on his bike. He was coming to do some boxing with my roommate. And Brock worked with me on the Bernie campaign. So we were talking about politics for a while I was getting that sun in my eyes. And he works at a homeless shelter now, or he runs the local homeless shelter. So talking about that. We were talking about Russell Brand. He really likes Russell Brand now. So yeah, I got those photons in my eyes, and I got to interact with my community, with one of my best buddies, talk some politics. So yeah, if you need help modding it, let me know. We do Papa Squatch. We do need help modding it, so I will reach out. What I need to get your name on Discord. So I don't know. You could just send me that, I guess. Good morning, everyone. Hey, Christopher Romero, how are you? Anyways, can't wait to see Shapiro debate 18-year-olds. Me neither. I gotta have one video that's gonna bring in the views, right? That's gonna talk about Hassan Piker, Ben Shapiro, or something that's gonna draw eyeballs. Because sometimes we just like to talk theory, we just like to talk history, whatever. But like when we upload videos about Hassan Piker, they get thousands of views instantly when you just name like a celebrity or someone who's famous. So that's what we're doing here. And I'll try and still make it informative and educational, of course, but and theory based. But people who spend more time trying to come up with an ideology to pick like chocolate from a box and actually engaging with theory are just like ignorant teenagers. Yeah, that's like kind of like, and I like this YouTube channel. It's funny, JREG, JREG. But like he basically just jokes about all the different political ideologies, and jokes about switching between them, and right-wing extremists teaming up with left-wing extremists or whatever. And yeah, there's a lot of people who literally do it like that, though. They're like, that ideology sounds fun. I'm an anarcho-communal communist. I'm an anarcho-syndicalist. I'm a blah, blah, blah. I'm a Nazbol. Like, yeah, sure you are. There's no Nazbol party in America, so you're completely irrelevant. And you're never actually going to change anything, but cool. You can call yourself a Nazbol on Twitter. It's basically what it is. Are you watching Ben Shapiro debate 18-year-olds to feel superior? Or are you watching Ben Shapiro debate 18-year-olds to feel superior? Oxford comma man makes all the difference. I guess I'm watching Ben Shapiro debate 18-year-olds so he can feel superior. How do you leave a Discord? I don't know. You probably Google that one. I am not a Discord expert. Hey, Pedamio. I got added to this Discord and I hate it, but I don't know how to leave. I cussed everyone out, but I'm still in the Discord. Sounds about right, Cobra. I don't know. Good morning, Loaf of Kropotkin. Today I have something really interesting. We're going to react to Ben Shapiro and his debates and all that stupid crap. But also, and speaking of my friend who I worked on the Bernie campaign with, some of y'all have heard me talk about these presentations I used to give based around sustainable housing and sustainable development and, yeah, just sustainable neighborhood, like city design, basically, neighborhood design, like civil engineering. I used to give a presentation on that, but I actually went back today and I found my old presentations. I found the old PowerPoints. So we can go through those and we can talk about sustainable housing. And it's really incredible, like, what they've been able to do with, like, experimental public housing, where, like, rather than putting poor people in the projects, which are, usual public housing where people go, they put people in these sustainable neighborhoods with a lot of sidewalks, a lot of parks, a lot of bike paths, just lots of things, lots of greenery, lots of community gardens, things that are known to increase happiness and increase community and make people's lives better. And like the level of poverty sinks, the level of happiness skyrockets. They're sustainable. Like, it makes so much sense. We should make all of our neighborhoods public and, like this. But we don't, because of capitalism, because the landlords run our housing and they're not public. Wondering if you ever ended up keeping your word and paying the $10,000 to the people who read Marx. Remember the challenge you posted on TikTok? Yeah. I remember I posted that saying I'm going to pay you $10,000 if you read one word of Marx. And then every sad, humorless, libertarian conservative was like, are you actually going to pay me now? What? Aren't you a man of your word? So I apologize that you guys don't understand humor, that you guys don't understand jokes, but I don't even have $10,000 to give you. And if I did, I wouldn't give it to you because that was a joke. Congrats on reading one page of Marx, though. All right, which video should we start with here? Let's start with this TikTok called Become Your Own Bank. So there's a lot of interesting videos giving financial advice that, are like borderline, they border on anti-capitalism. Because they're like, you got to escape the system. You got to gain financial freedom for yourself. My parents sent me actually a real estate guy the other day talking about whether or not capitalism was broken. So they give sometimes good analyses of capitalism, but then they say the solution to the system being broken is pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, becoming a landlord. Right? The solution is never socialism. But this is an example of one of those videos where they give a good analysis of capitalism, an analysis that really explains the banking sector and crises of banking and crises of capitalism. So I thought it would be interesting to watch. This is from the Discord server in the React suggestions section. So if you want to join the Discord and or if you want me to react to certain videos or articles, join the Discord. And go to the stream react suggestions and just send me whatever links you want me to look at.
60 seconds. So it's like, you got somebody named John. John just made $10 and he don't know what to do with it. So naturally, he's just going to put it in the bank and say, here's my $10. Just babysit this and keep it for me. And they say, we would love to do it. Now, what the bank does is they take John's $10. They leave one here. And then someone says, well, I would love to buy a house. What? I need about $4. And the bank says, well, here you go. Take $4 of John dollars. He's actually not using it, and you can use it to buy a house. Just make sure you pay us back and give us interest. And somebody else might say, well, I would like a new car right now, but I need $3. Well, the bank is going to say, here's $3 of John dollars, and I'll let you use it. Just do me a favor. Pay us back with interest. We got to make some money from this. And someone looks at this and says, oh, my kids are super smart. They might be the next lawyer, doctor. Well, I don't have enough money to send them to college. Well, the bank says, here's $2 of John dollars. Don't worry about it. He doesn't know. Just pay me back with interest, okay? And John says, well, man, the brakes on my car just went out. I need my $10 back. And he goes back to the bank, and the bank says, you only have $1 here. Now, we can give you all 10 back, but it's going to take us 3, 4, 5 business days to get it back to you. Now, John is super angry because he put $10 in, and he only has access to one. This is what happened to Silicon Valley Bank. This is exactly how banks go bankrupt because they're loaning more money than they actually have. Now, if you want to learn more about this and how you become your own private bank and kind of X them out, DM me. I can show you exactly how you can do it.
So there you go. That's essentially how it works, and that's how our whole economy is propped up by banks and by finance capital. Right? You store your money in the bank, they loan it out with interest. They loan it out to people who they know can't pay it back, which is what caused the subprime mortgage crisis in 2008. And eventually, when people can't pay it back, the whole system comes crashing down, and everyone who's reliant on the bank for financing, which is basically the entire economy at this point, gets screwed. And that's why 2008 was such a crisis. And now they're saying we might be approaching another complete collapse of the financial system. By the way, look at all the people trying to get into Cuba. Oh, my bad. That's Florida. That's hilarious that you say that, because there are more people going back to Cuba now than there are going to Florida. So you can't even use that dumbass talking point anymore. You idiot. Oh my gosh. And this is like part of why Midwestern Marx started, because Carlos, the person who runs this website, is from Cuba. And when his mom got sick and she couldn't afford healthcare in the US, all the anti-communists in Miami were saying, go back to Cuba and get free healthcare. Go to Cuba. And Carlos was like, what? Why? I thought Cuba was an evil dictatorship. Why would we go to Cuba for free healthcare when we can't afford healthcare in the US? And that is why the migration patterns are now shifting to where a lot of people are going back. There's more people going to Cuba than there are fleeing Cuba to Florida. So sorry, I had to point out that comment because it's just so laughably wrong. But yeah, I mean, that's how our whole system is propped up pretty much. And it's not just like individuals who are reliant on the banks for financing or who owe debt to the banks. Most of the big businesses, most of the big corporations, and all of the healthcare corporations, which I know from studying healthcare administration, are reliant on debt capital. They're reliant on financing from these banks. So if the banks go under, if the banks crash, the healthcare system comes crashing down. The freaking auto industry comes crashing down. Possibly housing and real estate, like in 2008. You never know, but the whole system is propped up by credit. The whole system is propped up by banks. And, eventually, though, that isn't going to work. Eventually, like I said, the interest is going to add up and people aren't going to be able to pay that back. And that's why you get a crisis every, 8 to 12 years, or a financial crisis. There are other kinds of crisis too, but under our financial neoliberal stage of capitalism, usually they are usually the crises are financial crises of the banks. So that was a really good explanation there with the cups, and his solution to that, of course, is to gain financial freedom. And he says, become your own bank. But the only way to do that is to seize the banks, take the banks into public hands, have them be publicly owned rather than owned by profit-hungry capitalists. Eddie was ready with the articles, LOL. Definitely. I'm not gonna... All right. You know how many Cuban gusanos I deal with? You know how many people come in here like, did you know that people fled Cuba for Miami? Like, oh no. You mean the plantation owners who had their slaves taken by the revolution? Oh, let me shed a few tears for them. Like, yeah, that's the defeated bourgeois class. That's the defeated ruling class. They tucked their tails and ran. That doesn't make me anti-socialist. Can you be so blind to the realities and horrors of communism? Because I've actually studied these communist countries like Cuba, unlike you, right? So you thought that more people were fleeing Cuba than people fleeing Florida. You are absolutely wrong. There are more people fleeing Florida for Cuba because of the broken healthcare system and other things in the U.S., right? So the reason I support these socialist countries is not because they're perfect, but it's because I've actually studied them and I realized that Cuba has taught everyone to read. They brought healthcare to everywhere, including the Escambray, the rural regions where people used to have to walk 2 days just to see a doctor, and they would probably be turned away because they were impoverished. Right? I know that Cuba was based on plantation labor and foreign exploitation, and the rich Americans basically used Havana, Cuba, like Las Vegas, to just have brothels and prostitutes and gamble and things like that. Before the revolution got rid of that and reinvested all the Cuban resources in education and healthcare, and all these things that have made the country better. And they're far more democratic than the U.S., which is why the U.S. has been unable to destroy Cuba, despite 70 years of crippling embargo, despite surrounding Cuba with our military, which is the real horror, right? The horrors of capitalism far exceed the horrors of socialism. Even if you just look at the capitalist sanctions that we hold on socialist countries as they try and develop themselves. It's like, if socialism always fails, why do you need to surround these countries with your military and stop them from trading with sanctions? And the answer is socialism doesn't always fail. The U.S. is just trying to make it fail. But if you actually studied these countries, you would support them. And the reason that I'm so dismissive of these horrors of communism arguments is because a lot of times they're pulled straight out of your ass. And a lot of times they completely ignore all other factors and all historical context. There are a lot of immigrants in Miami. Okay, well, why? were, a lot of them people who owned slaves in Cuba and had their plantations taken by the revolution when the slaves rose up? Yes, that is the truth, right? That's just a reality. So no, I'm not going to shed a bunch of tears for the plantation owners. So yeah, actually study the countries. And actually, my buddy Matt Connolly is writing his senior thesis on Cuba, the same way I wrote my senior thesis on Venezuela. And I know he was inspired by mine because of people like you, because of people who say these countries are evil, bad, they've never done anything. They kill their people just for fun. They eat their people's puppies. That's what socialism's all about, right? The more you look into it, the more you find it's not true. It's like, why are these people lying about this country? And you look into it more, and it's interesting. And the more that you research these countries, the more nuanced you find that they are, and the more that you find the Western media is lying about them and the Western education system. So that's why I'm so dismissive of these horrors of communism arguments. And I'll send you my buddy Matt Conley's paper when he's done with it. Censorship, the true revelation of a lost argument. Who's being censored? Nobody censored you. You're just getting destroyed. Everyone's just telling you why you're wrong, and you're getting upset. Do you deny these horrors of communism? Like what? Like what horrors of communism? Right? You guys attribute, like, if somebody's refrigerator falls on them in China, you're like, that's a death of communism. The Black Book of Communism literally includes Soviet soldiers who died fighting Nazi Germany as deaths of communism. Those aren't deaths of communism. They died defending their communist country from the Nazis, or their communist government from the Nazis. But the Black Book of Communism tallies the 20 million Soviets who died in World War II and says this is a death of communism. Yet when 2 million people starve every year, when 40,000 Americans die every year because they don't have health care, when millions of kids are killed in the Iraq War, or when 500,000 Iraqi civilians are starved to death by U.S. sanctions, and Madeleine Albright goes on 60 Minutes to say it was worth it, y'all never say it's horrors of capitalism, right? It's never your system's fault, even though we live under global capitalism. But everyone who tripped and fell down the stairs in Cuba is a death of communism. Right, so it's this game, this death count economics game, where you try and attribute every single death that you can to socialism and communism, while whitewashing the crimes of capitalism. When if you compare the two systems, it's not even close. I mean, Howard Waitskin did an academic study looking at the standard of living in socialist versus capitalist countries. It's not even close. And of course it's not. The first 10 years of the USSR were the fastest increase in human life expectancy ever seen in human history. Once they started, nationalizing certain industries and trying to bring people healthcare and ameliorating all the poverty that's created by capitalism, right? Then the first 10 years of the Soviet Union were later surpassed by China. China became the fastest increase in life expectancy in human history, right after the socialist revolution. So if you look at reality rather than just death count economics, rather than just saying, communism killed 800 million bajillion people and pretending that capitalism hasn't killed everyone, if you actually look at the economic development and how it's affected people's lives in these countries from a statistical point of view, or even a non-statistical point of view, it's obvious that socialism is better. Like I said, I think it's Howard Waitskin who did a study on it, but there you go. Good job. Now you learned. Come up with some better talking points next time. Okay, so that was the explanation of how banks go bankrupt. Now, actually, let me quick shout out our $10 Patreon supporters. Really appreciate all the Patreon supporters. You get a copy of the Journal of American Socialist Studies on ebook if you're a $10 supporter. You also get that if you are a YouTube member. At the next week, we're going to be releasing Carlos's new book, Western Marxism, or The Crisis of Western Marxism. The Crisis of West. I can't ever think of the actual name of the book. The Purity Fetish book. That'll be released. So yeah, patreon.com/MidwesternMarks. Thank you to A. Coco, Amazeline, Andrew Tibbetts, Anna Williams, Ariel, Ayo Hillary, Benjamin Calvet, Brady, Bryce Rafa, Burnt Reynolds, Sellerdorp, Christian Cook, Christopher Stombaugh, CJ, Cody, David Burney, David Rock, Debbie Ho, DRRD, Elliot Cook, Gabe Glazer, Galactic Beyond, Jilly Trice, Glenn Goldman, Hobie Huckle, Jorge, Hakon Klepe Norman, Ian Snyder, Iraj Rafiq, Isaac Hohen, Jack Kelleher, Jeremy Bishop, Johnny.it, Joseph Hoffer, Joseph Machado, Julie P67, Kevin Durham Sr., Christopher Bustle, Loaf of Kropotkin, Lucas Meadows, Marvin Roman, Mashed Answers, Max Maddox, Naomi, Philip Gendralt, Pranav Sima, Semi-Anonymous, Silas James, SJ Mage, The Day almost done. Tiva, Tom Smith, Uncle Joey, Vanguard Party Animal, Victorio R, Vince Barbarossa, Vince Barbosa, Xenon Tunin, aka Moon Factor, Zachary Pleasantberry. And that's it for $10 patrons. So thank you so much to all of those people. Thank you to all of our YouTube members as well. We've got almost 20 YouTube members now. Dustin Schlesinger, ILL State Fishing, Insomniac 2007, Duck Hash Browns, Christopher Bustle, Alexander Meta Pistriana, something. Comrade Nikto, Trevor Kistner, Sam Dixon, Working Class Solidarity, Christopher Romero, Yup, Pyeonseng Day, Fido K, Cobra Commander, Zagaloaz Zellinger, Pacheco Roan, Bossy, Joseph George, Pedamio, Ware Pilgrim, Lillian Marquix, Cade Grenade, Isaac, Turbana, Les Cassowaries, Treya, Raj Minaj. Holy cow, we have a lot of YouTube members. Yimi No, Set Along Gate, MMT Chaparrito, YHHW. Yeah, and some more. Don Hammonds, Keegan Anarchist. So thank you to all of our $10 supporters on Patreon and YouTube, and our under $10 supporters. Really appreciate all of you a great deal. Less theory, more reality. The whole point of Marxist theory is materialism, to base your theory on reality. But thank you, conservative who dismisses socialism because the Black Book of Communism said millions and bajillions of people have died. Thank you for telling us that we need to interpret reality. We had no idea. Jesus Christ. All right, let's watch. Since we've had to engage with some stupidity in the chat this morning, let's go right into Ben Shapiro. This is a video titled "F You, I'm Talking." Student loses it while debating Ben Shapiro. And I remember I used to watch these videos in high school. I'd be like, why can't anyone own this guy? Why can't anyone debunk this Ben Shapiro guy? He must just be so smart. And then now, as a 25-year-old or 26-year-old, I turned 26 the other day, who's graduated college, I recognize that he's debating children. Right, these are undergraduate children. These people are 18 to 22. Yes, they're intelligent, for their age. They're in college. They're learning. But they still haven't experienced a lot of real life. Right? They haven't had a whole lot of time to develop intellectually. Certainly not as much time as Ben Shapiro, who's in his 30s. And he talks really fast and comes at these college kids and clips it and puts it on YouTube to make himself look like a genius. But then he'll never, ever, ever, ever debate somebody who's intelligent, right? He did with Andrew Neil that one time on BBC, and he ended up storming off all angry. But he'll never, ever debate like an intellectual. He'll never, ever debate like Richard Wolff, because they would expose his ignorance. He'll only debate 19-year-old college students who get emotional and tell him, F you, I'm talking. So I would speed it up, but we all know that Ben Shapiro talks at light speed. So
I asked my question. So do you come from Holocaust survivors, or are you a Jewish family that didn't?
So my great-great-grandparents arrived here. A lot of our extended family was killed in the Holocaust, but our immediate
Your great-great-grandparents, but not your grandparents.
Right.
Oh, do you have friends whose grandparents were Holocaust survivors or anything like that?
Of course, many of them. Yeah, I've helped write memoirs of Holocaust.
Yeah. Their families are kind of messed up, right? Like my family is very messed up.
I mean, if you go through a trauma like the Holocaust,
they teach that trauma between generations. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, trauma very often in a lot of circumstances is passed down. I mean, I know some kids of Holocaust survivors who are fantastic and some who didn't. I mean,
Yeah. Okay. So
Okay.
you are officially woke. That is what wokeness is about. It's like, people's grandparents or their great-grandparents were slaves.
well, it's okay. No, it's okay. Guys,
Fuck you, I'm talking.
Guys, I actually want to hear. I want to hear.
No, this-
It's okay. It's okay. I want to hear. Let's at least hear the argument. Let's hear it. Let's hear it. Go.
What? He wants to hear me.
I do want to hear it. It's fine. Let him go. Well, let's hear it.
Come on. I'll just,
So explain how that's woke.
This guy is struggling up here. You can tell he's getting emotional with the audience getting on him. You got to be able to keep your cool, especially if you know you're going to be in a hostile environment. Like, he's already screaming F you, but I get what he's saying. He's saying, wokeism is just trying to address generational trauma. So Ben Shapiro is then woke because he supports helping those who have generational trauma left over from the Holocaust.
Woke.
So, I mean,
It depends on how you define woke, I guess.
the whole thing is like, let's see. So during Silent Cal, Calvin Coolidge's administration, do you know about like the Great Mississippi Flood back in the 1930s?
I understand that American history is filled with racial.
Yeah. And that causes some intergenerational trauma, which affects people's ability to be
So let me
effective and things like that.
Fine. So let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Why, so if the idea is that history has consequences, of course that's true. That's not wokeness.
Yeah.
That is not wokeness. What wokeness suggests is that fundamental institutions in American
No,
society
it
are so-
doesn't.
Yes, it 100%
I ran Elizabeth Warren's campaign. I helped organize.
is that fundamental institutions in American
No,
society
it
are so
doesn't.
Yes, it 100% does.
I ran Elizabeth Warren's campaign. I helped organize her volunteers around here. I am a representative of wokeness.
Okay, well,
and that's just, this is all it is.
Well,
I
I hope that
So it's a debate essentially now over what woke means. What does the word woke mean? What is wokeness? And he goes, I was Elizabeth Warren's campaign manager. I'm the authority on wokeism. Which he's kind of got Ben Shapiro there. He kind of is. Even though Elizabeth Warren angered a lot of leftists when she, was saying that she's native or an indigenous person to try and weaponize that identity or use that identity group to boost her own political career. And turned out she was like 0.005% indigenous or whatever. But as the campaign manager for Elizabeth Warren, I concede, sir, you are the authority on wokeism.
When I went to go get my first tattoo, the guy had lightning bolts and 88s tattooed on his neck. And as a Jewish person, that's really messed up. It's basically a threat.
there are racist people who exist. The argument that you're making, and I'm going to close with this because this is going in weird directions, and I don't really want to.
No, it's not.
I don't really want to. Just hold
This
up a
is-
second.
this
I let
is
you get
all
out your arguments,
wokeism
and
is.
now it's time for me to respond. So I let you say.
Okay,
before.
I'll let you respond, but
No,
I just
not
think
Bud. Now's my turn.
You are not characterizing what I'm saying accurately.
Now it's my turn. Your definition is inaccurate. The reason your definition is inaccurate is because any sentient human being would acknowledge that history has consequences.
Right.
But if the idea is, but that's not what wokeism is. Wokeism is a different thing. Wokeism suggests that all inequalities of today are attributable to not only historic injustices, but also continuing injustices in the now, and that all disparity is attributable to discrimination.
Like that, but a
not just
conservative.
that. Not
A
just
conservative
that.
is the
Not
only
just-
person.
not
And
just-
I want to know why. Why is it that conservatives are the only people who define it like that? Why
Why-
are conservatives the only people?
Okay, so we're gonna have to stop here because this is going nowhere. But
What's up?
I'm gonna have to stop with this with you because this is going nowhere. All I'm going to say is this. To
No,
sum up,
I just am trying to understand
disagree
your perspective.
on
Just one more second.
a fundamental.
This person cannot stop interrupting him. Holy cow. I would kind of like to see what Shapiro would have to say to respond, but yeah, I don't know. I think what Shapiro's probably against is national historical nihilism, or I shouldn't say that's what Shapiro's against, because he's just against anything that he perceives as being left-wing or liberal. That's what he perceives as wokeism, but the conservatives trying to take like African-American studies out of the education system in Florida, they don't consider that cancel culture or wokeism, even though it's, the same type of thing. This political ideology we don't like. We're trying to cancel it out of society. But what we're against, the Midwestern Marx, and what Carlos wrote so much about in his book, Marxism and the Purity Fetish, or the Purity Fetish and the Crisis of Western Marxism. That's the name of it. He says that there's this national historical nihilism where we're hyper obsessed with the bad things that have gone on in society, that have gone on in the past. And you can kind of see that with this youngster here who's debating Ben Shapiro from the Elizabeth Warren campaign. like, our history is terrible and we need to deal with that generational trauma, which is true. But also every time, or, at every stage in our history where there's been oppression, there's also been resistance to that oppression. There's also been communists, socialists, organizers, people who were against slavery. There's always been that pole of resistance, right? Because dialectically, when there's a pole of oppression, right, there's the dominant ruling class. There needs to be the class of people who they rule, the working class, right? And that working class has always had organized resistance to the ruling class throughout our entire history. And the part of our history that we need to embrace and recapture is that working class resistance, is that resistance to the rulers, which, we have to avoid falling into national historical nihilism, this idea that America is just all bad and there's nothing from our history that can be recaptured or nothing from our history that's good. But we also, of course, have to actually acknowledge the class oppression, the class exploitation, the class struggle in our system, and the generational trauma from years of class struggle, which is what Ben Shapiro wants to ignore. Right? Ben Shapiro wants to say there's no oppression anymore, there's no exploitation, quit whining. Right? Whereas the Elizabeth Warren person is like, oh, America's all bad, it's terrible. Why don't you care about generational trauma? And I think there's a dialectical middle ground between the arguments, where we can embrace the good parts of our history, but the good parts of our history are the working class struggle parts. And those are the parts that we need to embrace today and struggle against the ruling class, which of course Ben Shapiro's against because he gets paid millions of dollars by the ruling class to be a puppet.
On the fundamental level, you're shifting definitions to avoid the consequences of your own argument. And if the idea is... And final point, if you're going to... Hold on. If you're also, just final point to sum up there. Final point to sum up.
I can follow that.
Yeah, I just want to make, honestly, I want to make one final point to sum up there. If the idea is that traumas of the past invariably bleed down into the present, that does not explain why certain groups that have been historically not only marginalized but slaughtered in mass genocide are some of the most successful groups in our society. So if the idea is that past trauma always equals current inequality, or that my actions in, say, robbing a convenience store are attributable to bad actions that happened in Alabama in 1930, the answer to that is no. Don't rob the convenience store. The only way they're going to be able to...
So he's really being woke without realizing it. He's individualizing every problem. Right? We all know what he's talking about here. He's saying black people choose to rob convenience stores. It's not the fault of generational trauma. Well, Ben, why do people rob convenience stores? Why do people need to get money and food from convenience stores? Because they're living in poverty and they don't have money and food. If those people weren't living in poverty, if they weren't subjected to redlining laws, if they weren't subjected to brutal exploitation, then they wouldn't need to rob the convenience store. Capitalism creates poverty, which creates crime. But if you view everything through an individualistic mindset, you can be like, well, there are rich black people and then there are black people who rob convenience stores. It all comes down to individual choices. Individual choices. But where is most of the crime happening? Is it happening in rich neighborhoods? Is it happening in wealthy neighborhoods? No, it's happening in impoverished neighborhoods. And it's black and white and Latino and, gay and straight and people of all different kinds of identity groups, because what matters is their economic class, right? People commit crimes of any identity group when they can't afford to buy food or the necessary means of life, the means of subsistence. So they rob and steal or sell drugs or whatever to afford food and afford rent and afford these things. That's people of all identity groups, but you individualize everything and make everything about race and sexuality and gender, because at the end of the day, Ben Shapiro is just a woke culture warrior. He's just on the other side of the spectrum, right? You got the Elizabeth Warren guy on one side, and then you have Ben Shapiro on the other. They both view everything through a lens of individualism. They both lack class analysis, but then they're opposed to each other in how they define wokeism. Right? You're woke. No, you're woke. No, you're woke. No, you're woke. No, you're both woke. And the socialists, the people who understand that economic class is the main dividing line in society and the line that exploitation is based upon, and that economic class is determined by the relationship of someone to the means of production, those are the people who aren't woke, I guess. So yeah, kind of interesting. It wasn't like the crowd was really annoying and they just kept talking over each other. So you couldn't hear them fully flesh out their arguments, but it's all individualism, right? It's all identity politics. It's the same thing that we see all the time. That's all that these people like Ben Shapiro do. They just talk about how they hate the culture war and how the culture war doesn't matter. And then they harp on the culture war all day, every day, because it brings views and pays the bills. Meanwhile, they're completely distracted from any kind of class analysis. Like in that debate, why didn't the Elizabeth Warren person was hyper focused on generational trauma in individuals or with certain identity groups? Why didn't they bring up class, right? Why didn't they say, Ben, what material conditions encourage people to rob convenience stores? Do you really think that only comes down to individual choice? Like, you're a spoiled rich kid who always had your needs met. Your parents, paid for everything that you needed. There are people who are born into families where they don't have that, where they're maybe in a single home, where they're living in poverty, where they don't know where their next meal's coming from. And yes, that encourages people to join gangs and rob stores and do crimes. But you completely ignore the material conditions that push people into poverty, which, like I said, are based on class, not on, the identity group of certain individuals. But that Elizabeth Warren person doesn't bring that up. They don't bring up the class analysis because they see things through the same frame, the same lens, or same framework of wokeism and individualism and identity politics that Ben Shapiro does. And it's hilarious to see they're just, two sides of the culture war. They're two sides of the wokeism coin. And both of them are lacking class analysis. Ben never worried once about paying his bills. Yeah, it'd be hilarious if Ben Shapiro was reincarnated as a poor person, as like a poor black kid in like a impoverished neighborhood, and to see if he would like fall into gang violence or crime or whatever, because he would. And it's easy to blame 300 million Americans for being too lazy when there's 400 rich families being too greedy. Yes. Misplaced anger. Ben's argument is insane. Why do some historically genocided minorities do fine and others steal? What is he suggesting? That some minorities are just inherently lesser? Yeah, right. And that's why he always ends up in a place where it's like, wait, what are you implying here, dude? Like, what are you implying here? This is like, some races rob convenience stores. Like, oh yeah, what race are you talking about, Ben? Some identity groups do good. And probably talking about Jewish people. And it's like that's the place you end up in when you don't view things through a class lens. When you're not actually looking at the material conditions and you're hyper obsessed about identity groups, right? You eventually end up in a racist place. Right? Because how do you describe, or how do you explain that there's higher levels of crime for some groups rather than other groups? If you believe that we truly live in a meritocracy and everybody has the choice to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, you're going to say, oh, the identity groups who have more poverty, are afflicted with more poverty, are simply worse identities. So you always end up in a racist place. You hyper obsessed with on the identity politics. When there's so many, like there's the class factors explain things so much better. Like, you really think Africa is less industrialized than the West because of the racial groups of people there, because of their skin color? No, it's because of imperialism, dipshits. It's because capitalists conquered the Western world. They conquered Europe and Russia and North America, and then they went to colonize the global South. They're like, let's super exploit Latin America and Africa, and we have more advanced production, we have guns, so we can force them to do what we want. No, it's not exploitation. It's not material conditions. It's the skin color of people that affects politics and economics and crime. It's just so stupid. It's just idealism. And it's embarrassing for our society that people like Ben Shapiro are propped up as public intellectuals, you know. Like, it's truly embarrassing for our country. They still talk as if Europe actually developed Africa. That's true. And they do. If that was true, we wouldn't need the Belt and Road Initiative. By the way, we went up to 57 subs on the Eddie Liger gaming account. Nice. That's pretty good. We've been doing gaming streams on twitch.tv/MidwesternMarks and youtube.com/Eddie Ligersmith Gaming. So if you're interested in gaming and Marxism and just hanging out and chatting and asking questions, usually there's like 15 to 30 people in the gaming streams chat, so you can converse with me more. You have easier access to ask questions or whatever. And then they're just more chill, more laid back. So if you're interested in that, if you like gaming, subscribe to the Eddie Ligersmith Gaming account and stay tuned for the gaming streams on Twitch. What the heck was I going to? Oh, yeah, I have a super chat I didn't get to. Garden State RX8 book recommendation: War Against All Puerto Ricans, Revolution and Terror in America's Colony. I'll definitely check that out. Thank you. Puerto Rico is the only foreign country I've ever been to, even though it's technically not a foreign country because it's U.S. territory still, U.S. colony still. But I'll definitely check that out. Super interesting. Still have a lot of friends in Puerto Rico. So actually, I think I'm Facebook married to Abner Maldonado, my buddy from Puerto Rico. It says we're married. So thank you very much for the super chat and the recommendation. Looks very good. Are you gaming tonight? Probably. I got to get my homework done. I got to work out. But if I'm not freaking exhausted, which you never know, I will definitely hop on tonight and do a gaming stream. So, yeah, look forward to that, y'all. Make sure you follow the Eddie Ligersmith Gaming account. It's going to be good stuff. Good stuff. Good stuff. Okay. Let's do, what should we do next? Biden is seeking to mandate electric cars. That's interesting. I have a whole bunch of stuff about electric cars, sustainable housing. I want to talk about censorship too, because those recent Pentagon documents that got leaked by the kid, it's like a youngster, 21-year-old kid who leaked these documents on Discord showing that U.S. forces were in fact involved in Ukraine. And they're prosecuting him or trying to prosecute him or saying they're going to prosecute him under the Espionage Act, which is the same thing they're trying to do to Julian Assange, which everyone has been saying if you allow them to do this to Assange, they're going to be able to do this to everyone and censor anyone they want. So the Espionage Act makes it so these people being prosecuted can't bring forward a public defense trial. They can't say, I leaked this information. By example, Assange leaked a video of the U.S. military gunning down civilians with a military helicopter. He can't say, I leaked this information because it's in the public good. Right? The public has a right to know that their tax dollars are being used to buy helicopters that are gunning down civilians. The Espionage Act makes it so he can't say that. He can't use that defense, and they can basically lock him up for as long as they want for exposing government war crimes. And now they're trying to do it with this 21-year-old kid who just exposed that, one, the U.S. has been lying about how many Ukrainians they've gotten killed with their proxy war. Which, again, if you have a Ukraine flag in your bio, if you're cheering on the war in Ukraine, you're cheering Ukrainians to their death. That is what you are doing. So the numbers are way higher than what the U.S. has been reporting. And the person showed that France, the UK, the U.S. all have special forces in Ukraine. So, of course, we knew that U.S. military personnel were in Ukraine helping to lead the proxy war, but they hadn't admitted it for now. If you said that in the past, you'd be called a conspiracy theorist. But now we know because of these leaked papers, and the person who leaked it, they're trying to throw him in jail forever. They're trying to torture him and silence him like they did to Assange. The land of the free. America's so great because of freedom and the First Amendment, freedom of speech. Unless you tell people about the government gunning people down with military helicopters, then you get thrown in a cage. Good morning, Eddie. Started reading Xi Jinping Governance of China and excited to see what I learned. Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrew, for the $10 super chat. I got that book right back there behind Little Uzi Vert, my Little Uzi lamp. Little Uzi and Xi Jinping are boys. It's a great book. You learn how China is applying Marxism, their struggle to build socialism, what their foreign policy is all about, what their main goals for the country are right now, all that good stuff. So I am actually going to play this RBN video about censorship now, and I'm going to listen to it with you guys, but I'm going to run and grab my water while I do so. But I will be back in like 2 minutes to react to this video. And don't worry, I'm still with you. I'm still listening. I'm doing it on my phone.
I don't know if you have seen this. If you have not, we're going to talk about this. There is something strange going on. So the Cash App founder, is murdered. And then this was announced. Now, remember, he was a part of crypto as well. They just announced that on that video. All of a sudden, the federal government, listen to this. This is coming from Say Cheese. I'm going to make this a little bit larger for you guys so you can see it because there we go. The U.S. Federal Reserve banking system is launching its own Cash App called FedNow. This happens after the founder of Cash App is murdered. Coincidence? Why is the Federal Reserve launching a Cash App? What is happening here? Let's go on. They're launching a Cash App called FedNow in July. This is a movement towards getting rid of physical money and having digital currency. There it is right there. You can look it up for yourself. FedNow, 24/7 instant payments. So this was sent my way. And I want you to hear this video clip here because this guy has a really interesting point in reference to this announcement.
This July, so what is FedNow? And is it really a way for the federal government to control us? The short answer is yes, it is. Now for the long answer. FedNow is a new payment service that will allow money to be transferred instantly 24/7, 365 days a year between banks, businesses, and people. Sounds all good and dandy, right? Wrong. This is how FedNow is going to work. At least this is their plan for how it's going to work. All the banks and businesses are going to sign up for the new FedNow instant payment service. Americans like you and I have our money in those banks. So if you buy something on Amazon, the money's going to go from your bank account to a Fed credit account, then to Amazon. Here's the issue. That Fed credit account is where all of the money in the United States will be funneled through. And if every bank and every business uses the FedNow service, the federal government will know your every single move. You go to.
That's what it's about. They will be tracking your money.
Wild. I didn't know exactly what this was. I didn't know that it had to do with currency. But, I mean, they already have huge control over your currency. Like when the protests were going down in Canada, the first thing Trudeau threatened to do was shut down people's bank accounts, shut down access to funds, shut down access to the income that they need to survive. And this just makes it easier, right? If all currency is digital, Emilio says, who the F cares if it's digital or not? Well, that makes it so much easier for them to track, right? They can track you much easier, which they can already do because of cell phones, you know, but the government could hypothetically just pull money out of your account whenever they wanted. They can shut down your account. They can track where you're at. It's just essentially another step towards being a digital surveillance state, which is a direction that we've been moving for a long time. So if the Fed completely controls the currency, and it's a digital currency, that's going to be more control over your life, which they already have so much control over your life. I see how you could not think it was a big deal, right? How you could see it as only a small step towards authoritarianism or whatever, the dictatorship of capital. But it's still a step, right? It's still a move towards entirely digitizing the currency and having it all run through the federal government.
So they'll know what you're buying. They'll know if you're giving money to someone. Remember that announcement months ago that they were adding more IRS agents? They are trying to find more ways to control us. We are seriously heading towards 1984. They want to watch everything. What do you think this TikTok ban was all about? The Restrict Act. They want to watch you. They want to see what we're doing. They want to see what we're buying.
Right. So there's a privacy that comes with using hard money, right? It's just an exchange between two people that is going away. And it's less so that this is just one move towards more censorship and more government control, more capitalist control. It is. But this is simultaneously with they're prosecuting Assange under the Espionage Act, right? They're prosecuting this 21-year-old kid under the Espionage Act. They're trying to make it so they can just throw people in jail for sharing things that they don't like. They are the Biden administration said they're going to massively increase censorship on social media and control of narratives on social media. They're constantly moving to ban TikTok after, already TikTok has banned like 7 of our accounts. You already can't tell the truth on TikTok without getting banned. And they're trying to ban the app completely because they don't like the information that we're sharing on it. Like I said, we are moving closer and closer towards a digital surveillance state, or we are in that point, honestly, right now, and probably have been since the creation of the NSA and the Patriot Act. But it's all these different moves towards increased surveillance. And it's almost all online, right? It's surveillance of your social media. It's surveillance of your online bank accounts, your online currency. It's moving to make all currency online and run through the Fed. All these moves to increase surveillance and increase control over the American people by the Biden administration, who hilariously in 2022 had a Press Freedom Day, World Press Freedom Day. Woo! You want to know how we protect press freedom? We throw people in jail for leaking that we're gunning down civilians with helicopters. That's how we support press freedom. We support press freedom by locking away 21-year-olds who leak Pentagon papers showing that the U.S. Special Forces are in Ukraine leading a proxy war. That's press freedom. And of course, what the U.S. always does, which is so hilarious, is they say this country's authoritarian. This country's a dictatorship. This country doesn't have any press freedom. We need to sanction them. We need to invade them. We need to exploit them. That's how we can uphold press freedom around the world. But here in America, we're becoming a surveillance state where they can cut off your bank account if you don't do what the government wants. Hooray for press freedom. So this is interesting. I mean, the currency supply was already becoming highly digitized, right?
And to that, I say to the
that's been happening for a while. So it only makes sense that the government would seize on it and say, we're gonna have FedPal instead of PayPal. Yeah, very interesting video there from RBN. Eddie, do you understand modern monetary theory? That privacy and money is a myth? That's not what modern monetary theory is, Pedamio. They could already do that with digital currency, Eddie. I know, I said that, Pedamio. I said that. I said they can't track a cash transaction between two people. Which, I mean, they can if it's entered digitally. But if I were to, like, buy, I don't know, some commodity that my friend has from him by giving him cash, it would be impossible for the government to track that. Whereas if all transactions were digital, the government could track that. So, yes, it's a small step towards the surveillance state that we're already in, but it is a step towards more surveillance. And if you're denying that based on modern monetary theory, that doesn't make any sense. Bruh. Okay. Shout out to A. Liger Games. Literally the end of freedom. Literally 1984. Right. Even like what's interesting about liberalism and liberal capitalism is it promises you all these freedoms. It promises you all these political freedoms. Right? You're allowed to have freedom of speech. You have freedom of political expression. You have freedom to vote for whoever you want to vote for. Right? But as the capitalists gain power and accumulate, as the economic class continues to dominate and accumulate wealth, even those small freedoms that liberalism promises you start to go away. Right? They start censoring your freedom of speech. They start throwing people in jail for exposing what the capitalists are doing. They start influencing the elections, like the way that the DNC and the ruling class sabotage the Bernie campaign, or the way that lobbyists and donors control the elections, and how Citizens United basically legalized political bribery, made it easy for corporations to control the political system. Right? So freedom of speech and freedom of expression, freedom to vote for who we want, all these liberal freedoms that we're supposed to have get taken away by the ruling economic class. Because unless you ameliorate the class divide, unless you attack exploitation, you're always going to have a dictatorial system. You're always going to have one dominant class, especially with the way that capitalism is set up, especially a system based on wage labor, which is inherently leads to accumulation, which of course will lead to control of the political system by the ruling economic class. My favorite thing liberals do is give rights, but don't codify them so they can be stripped away. Yeah, like Roe v. Wade. Like Roe v. Wade. So Biden could have moved to codify Roe v. Wade into law, but he didn't. And then Roe v. Wade gets repealed by these conservative judges. And then the Democrats use it as a huge organizing effort, right? They raised so much money after Roe v. Wade got appealed because everyone's like, this is why we need to support the Democrats. Like the Democrats are in power right now. And they didn't move to codify this into law and make it a right. So it is it's just fake rights is just essentially what bourgeois freedoms are, liberal freedoms are. Fake freedoms. It's a fake democracy. Pedamio, I'm sorry. What you're saying about money right now does not make any sense. Money is controlled through taxes and interest rates. You don't need digital currency to change anything. See, but how does money and interest, how does taxes and interest rates mean that the government can track every transaction that you make? Right? Like, and if my friend has like a TV upstairs, if I were to give him $200 for that TV, the government could not track that transaction. Right? We would have privacy in that transaction. If all of the currency was digital, I would have to like Venmo him for that. Okay? And if the government ran that monetary system, that digital currency, they could track that. And there would no longer be any way to do exchanges which are private. So it would be an infringement on privacy. And I don't know what taxes and interest rates or modern monetary theory have to do with any of this. Eddie, get a load of this Johnny Harris propaganda video called How China Became So Powerful. Warning, this video is neoliberal propaganda. It's really bad, and it becomes more evident if you read the video's description. I won't specifically why you should read it, but I'll say that, but you'll see who funded and sponsored the video. All right, thank you, Jacob. Oh, no, I almost left the stream. I almost ended the stream. Woo! Woo! Glad I didn't do that. That would have been an L. That would have been an L. Let's see here. You could use a different currency / item of value for private transactions. Oh, yeah, true. You could do that. So I could, instead of giving my buddy $200 for his TV, I'll give him my headphones. Matt! I don't think he's here. He must have left. I was going to see if he wants to trade some of my protein powder for his headphones. Election of corporate prostitutes every 4 years is not democracy. It's masochism. True that. True that. We all got Stockholm syndrome. Gosh. Jacob, do you just prowl the internet for like the most ridiculous, like propagandistic videos ever? Because like, don't get me wrong, I love the videos you send and they are perfect for this stream. And I probably react to your videos more than anyone else, just because you always watch the stream, so you understand the videos I like to react to. But I swear, you find a new one every time. I'm like, this is so dumb. I want to watch this one, though. I do want to watch this one, because I also want to talk about sustainability in public housing, right? The presentation that I made. And we'll discuss that before we end the stream today. But I did a video about about modern China, the construction of modern China, how China actually got powerful and rich. It's one of my favorite videos. I spent weeks on this. Spent a lot of time. Artsy Marxist helped us out with it. Drew this awesome, or painted this amazing Xi Jinping painting and let us have it for free. This is basically China's path of economic construction, beginning with the revolution in 1949 all the way up to today. It's not a full breakdown. We published Carlos Martinez's pamphlet about the continuity of the Chinese Revolution, about the era of Deng Xiaoping. That is really good too, and I recommend people read that. But I put a lot of work into this. It's 34 minutes long, 35 minutes long, edited, filled with sources and other sources that you can go check out. So it'll be interesting to watch a neoliberal talk about how China became so powerful, and we can kind of compare and contrast to my video about how China became so powerful.
Back in the old days, this part of the world used to be the economic superpower of the planet. There were dynasties that discovered everything from the compass to printing to making paper to gunpowder. They would lead huge expeditions around the globe. This was China, the Middle Kingdom, and right next door, India. This was the center of the global economic universe. But around the 1800s, that started changing. Over here in Europe and the United States, there was a major revolution that started taking place. Science, then machines, then weapons, trains, cars, flight, bombs, factories, cities. And with their new power, these countries started to expand to take over large swaths of the map. China remained a great civilization.
I think that painting that was done by our comrade Artsy Marxist was actually shared by President Xi himself on Instagram. That's awesome. That's so cool. Happy to hear that, because that painting is freaking amazing. If it wasn't expensive, I would have one in my room. Hey, David. Good morning, comrades. Oh, look at that. Right as I pulled David's comment up, he sent a super sticker. Thanks, David. The original Patreon supporter. The man who's been here since Midwestern Marx started. I want to start doing Patreon Zoom chats again, David, so we can all hang out and talk. I'm just really busy right now, but soon. Thank you so much for the super sticker.
But as the West started showing up, knocking on China's door with their big guns, China couldn't really match their firepower, and they had to concede land to Britain, which is how we got Hong Kong.
I made a video about this the other day, and people got so mad about how, you know, the Industrial Revolution or the development of guns, which happened because of geographical and economic factors, allowed Britain to become the most dominant global empire. It allowed them to colonize Africa and Latin America because, as we were talking about with the last Ben Shapiro video, some people boil it down to race, or, you know, it's us, the great European race. We're so much smarter than everyone else. We're able to conquer the whole world. It's bullcrap. It was just that there were certain metals there, you know, like I said, geographic factors that allowed industrialization to happen there first. So they had firepower. They had steel ships and guns, and basically used that to colonize the rest of the world. Everything stems from production.
The Industrial Revolution didn't really happen in China the same way it did in the West. And by the middle
This is all true, by the way. Everything he said so far is true.
of the 1800s, China began a massive decline in its economic standing in the world. A century later, that situation got way worse, as China was invaded by its neighbor, Japan. China's economy was no longer the prosperous Middle Kingdom, but rather a shadow of itself, a poor country that was being occupied by outsiders. Once World War II was over, the West devised a new global economic and financial system. It was modeled after the economic system that was working so well in the West. Capitalism, free enterprise, still with some government oversight and high taxes for the rich and corporations, but it was still capitalism.
How is it working well in the West? They just had the Great Depression. The whole system just came crashing down, and the workers almost overthrew the system. Or hundreds of thousands of communists in the U.S. demanding that capitalism be ended. You had the Socialist revolution happen in the USSR, and then, you know, in a few years, China. Like, capitalism was not thriving and killing it at this point. This is where the government started intervening because of workers' demands to try and ameliorate the problems of capitalism. You know, higher taxes, social safety nets, more benefits for workers, allowing the workers to form into trade unions, things like this that gave the workers more power. And, you know, capitalism was almost abolished at this time. Like I said, there were a lot of people calling for capitalism to end. There was Huey Long was a politician in the U.S. who was straight up socialist, straight up communist, elected politician, demanding an end of capitalism. So it's not like capitalism was thriving and they're like, all right, let's expand capitalism. It's like capitalism was being threatened. The working class was threatening to tear the whole system apart. So they're like, how do we maintain power? How do we maintain dominance? Well, we give the workers some concessions, and then we set up this global financial system, the Bretton Woods system, dominated by the U.S. And that's when you have like the IMF and the World Bank are formed at the end of the 40s, as well as all sorts of other financial arms of the U.S. that allows them to manipulate politics and economics all around the world and maintain global capitalism.
And after the war, this capitalism would go on to become a miracle for many countries, rebuilding Germany, France, Japan. For many in the West,
And again, that was because of the Marshall Plan, right? Also, the Soviet Union greatly outperformed all of these countries in terms of industrialization, how quickly they industrialized, especially Japan. It's not even close. So socialist economic planning industrialized far more than capitalism, and oftentimes capitalism is associated with industry because people think socialism is just a poverty cult, when in fact socialism means industrialization and raising the productive forces. But these countries that had this, incredible economic growth were boosted by the Marshall Plan, where the US said, we're going to give you a bunch of developmental loans so you can develop equity, meaning capital, investments that make more money for the country, rather than the financial loans that the US gives countries now that leaves them trapped in debt and allows Western corporations and banks to suck all that money out of there. Instead, the US said, we're going to help you develop industry because Europe has been decimated by the war, and we want West Europe to be a bulwark against communism. We want those countries to remain capitalist. So again, another effort, another scheme to maintain capitalism. And we want military allies for the US. So they were given 4% loans, the European countries, which they just paid off in like the early 2000s. Really low interest rate loans aimed at developing equity. Very similar to what China is doing now with the Belt and Road Initiative. Very similar to what China is trying to do in the global south by offering countries very low interest rate loans aimed at developing equity, not at trapping them in debt. And that's what allowed these countries to industrialize so quickly. So it's basically capitalism using, central economic planning to maintain capitalism.
post-World War II capitalism was like a magic elixir that was fixing everything. It was working so
Dude, a magic elixir that was fixing everything. Bourgeois idealism. Bourgeois idealism. Let's not go into the details. Let's not talk about how the Soviet Union industrialized faster than all these countries using socialism. Let's not talk about the Marshall Plan. Let's not talk about the global financial system that was set up. Let's not talk about all the countries in the global south who were prevented from industrializing. Let's just say capitalism was a magic elixir that brought industry everywhere. Woo! Idealism is so much easier than going into particulars and actually trying to find the truth.
well that
I'm just going to start saying socialism's a magic elixir. There's never actually been anything bad that's ever happened in a socialist country. It's a magic elixir that spreads around the world and gets rid of capitalism and makes our lives better. Drink from the magic elixir.
more and more people started to believe that we needed to get government out of capitalism and let the market just do its thing. One of the major advocates for this idea of unfettered capitalism was this guy.
There has never in history been a more effective machine for eliminating poverty than the free enterprise system and the free market.
A Chicago-based economist named Milton Friedman.
We've reacted to that video too, the specific video where Milton Friedman talks about the free market. And I wonder if they'll talk about Pinochet, because Friedman was the basically the economic advisor to Augusto Pinochet, who, of course, Salvador Allende in Chile was democratically elected as socialist president, and the U.S. overthrew him in a coup, put in power one of the most horrendous dictators, Pinochet, who Latin America's ever seen, who was buddies with Reagan and Thatcher, made Milton Friedman his economic advisor, and basically induced the country with neoliberal shock therapy. Basically destroyed the country for poor people. Yeah, but that's just capitalism bringing that magic elixir to Chile. Cobra Commander, have you ever played the game Spore? It's a really fun game.
If they fail, they bear the cost. If they succeed, they get the benefit.
The idea at the core of this financial and economic system was that companies would get investment from people who own shares in that company. We call this a corporation. And that the sole purpose of this corporation was to make money for these owners or these shareholders. In Milton Friedman's own words, quote, "The social responsibility of a business is to increase profits. That is the role of a business. Increasing short-term gains for shareholders would benefit all of society," according to this model. And if you look at the data in the United States and the West, Milton Friedman sort of had a point.
Milton Friedman had a point. Look, line go up, GDP go up. And this is what happened in Chile too, right? The GDP went up. Like corporations were able to produce more because they were able to exploit the crap out of Chile. They were able to plunder Chile's resources for the first time. So yeah, they made more money, the Western corporations. And also this is the US GDP per capita, which is largely based on and aids or is aided by exploitation of the global South in places like Chile, and the sucking of wealth out of those places, which prevents the countries in the global South from developing industrially the same way that the West did. So really capitalism was, he's missing the other half of this, that capitalism was holding half of the world, preventing them from developing, when if they had socialism, they would be able to develop. But if they tried to do socialism, the US would overthrow them and steal all their resources. But in Chile, the GDP went up, and they called it the Chilean miracle because line go up means economy good, but starvation went up. Malnutrition went way up. Unemployment went up to like 20%, right? They took milk out of the schools that they were giving to kids. Child malnutrition shot through the roof. Education rates sunk. Literacy rates sunk, right? So yes, the line went up for corporations. Corporations made more profit, but for the vast majority of people in that society, for the working masses, life got incredibly worse, right? Because as Karl Marx said, as capitalism accumulates wealth at one pole, it accumulates misery and degradation at the other. So that's what they're bragging about here, basically. Look how much capitalism accumulated. Okay, well, it accumulated this off the backs of the working mass. It accumulated this wealth off the backs of the entire global South through the exploitation of the people in society who actually make society run, who actually create all this wealth that you're bragging about.
And it led to huge prosperity in the West as the US economy exploded. Wait a minute, but what about China? Are we talking about China and its economy, you know?
Naomi Klein's shock doctrine. I have tons of criticisms of Naomi Klein. I have criticisms of this book, but it's a great book for getting started understanding geopolitics. It explains how Milton Friedman and all these right-wing Chicago or Berkeley economists, when the U.S. would overthrow a government, when they would coup a government, they would set the new leader up with these economists like Milton Friedman so they could induce the countries with what Naomi Klein calls neoliberal shock therapy. So getting rid of any workers' organizations, any trade unions, getting rid of any welfare programs for workers, getting rid of the minimum wage. Any protections for workers were dismantled in favor of austerity and neoliberalism, which, sent tons of people into unemployment and poverty and drastically made people's lives worse to the point of being a human rights disaster. And this happened in the Soviet Union when it collapsed, in all the Soviet countries. It happened in Chile. It happened in New Orleans after Katrina. They used Katrina, that disaster, to induce the country with induce the city with neoliberalism, and all the public schools were turned into charter schools, and thousands of teachers lost their jobs and never got them back. So the U.S. uses a crisis, a political crisis, oftentimes, which is a crisis they create, to plunder these countries' economies. And then when the GDP goes up and when Western corporations get rich off it, they're like, oh, capitalism's the best. Capitalism did it. Look at the line going up. Johnny Harris, whoever you are. He's clearly a smart guy, but probably a propagandist. Probably gets money from some kind of NGO to make these videos.
The Middle Kingdom, China. So while the US and Western economies are thriving because of this corporate free market capitalism that was taking over the world, China was descending further and further into decline. Instead of joining the capitalism party that the West was spreading throughout the world, China resisted. turning to a one-party rule communist system.
This is such a stupid and obviously wrong description of the global situation at this time. To the point where if somebody who was alive during the 1940s and 1950s, even if they weren't a socialist, if they saw this, they'd be like, dude, what are you talking about? Right? Especially in the global South and in the East, everyone viewed the Soviet Union as this miracle. They're like, how did this country go from a feudal, agrarian, imperialist economy run by a monarchy to an industrialized superpower essentially overnight that defeated the Nazis? Well, they did it through socialist economic planning and investing in industrialization, right? So all these countries in the global South who were being prevented from industrializing by U.S. imperialism, or China who was being prevented by European and U.S. imperialism, they're like, we should move to socialism and industrialize ourselves the same way that the Soviet Union did, right? They weren't looking at free market capitalism as this miracle because America was getting rich. They knew that America was getting rich from the resources in the global South by stealing them, right? So they wanted to throw off their colonizers and move to something different. And when China did that, the first 10 years after the revolution, they did even better than the USSR. They industrialized even faster than the USSR. The USSR was previously the fastest increase in life expectancy in human history. China beat them. China topped them. That 10 years after the Chinese Revolution is now the fastest increase in life expectancy ever in human history. This is such revisionist history to say that capitalism was killing it. Capitalism was literally a magic elixir, bringing freedom and riches wherever it went. And then China resisted that and went communist because they wanted to stay poor. And why are you not bringing up the USSR? He's not even talking about the USSR. One of the most powerful countries in the world at this time was socialist. You're just ignoring that and talking about capitalism as a magic elixir. But this guy, this is one of those videos where like the production value is high, right? And it's an attractive guy who's speaking confidently, like he's a history teacher or something. So even though what he's saying is pure and utter nonsense, even though what he's saying could be debunked by a toddler who studies the 1950s, people are going to believe it. People are going to watch it. A lot of that stems from the high production value. Let me know if this is too fast.
Headed by this guy, Mao Zedong, who destroyed any chance of China's economy ever joining the prosperity happening around the world. By the 1970s, China was a place of widespread poverty. The once prosperous kingdom had reached rock bottom, but that was all about to change.
Like, what are you talking about, dude? What are you talking about? The prosperous kingdom. You mean the feudal peasants who would have their eyes gouged out by the landlords if they disobeyed? The country that didn't even have any industry or didn't have healthcare or wasn't developed whatsoever? What are you talking about? The only way that you could really think this is if you just ignored all of the working people, all of the working masses, and you only see things through the lens of the bourgeoisie, through the lens of the ruling class, right? So China was a rich and prosperous kingdom from the perspective of the kings and the landlords. If you ignore the 99% of the country living in extreme poverty in rural agrarian regions, the U.S. was prosperous. Capitalism was a magic elixir. If you ignore the millions exploited in the global South and the millions of American workers exploited and just look at things through the eyes of corporations, right? It's like he's completely isolating what was good for the ruling class, right? And then what was good for the ruling class is good for the whole country, which is what the bourgeoisie always does. Marx says this, that the bourgeoisie always identifies their interests with the interests of the whole of society. So China's a rich and prosperous kingdom, even though 99.9% of people are in poverty, because the ruling class is rich and prosperous.
So it's the 1970s, and this is China's new leader, Deng Xiaoping. He came into power hoping to turn...
Based? Wait, hold up. Say it again for me, please.
Is China's new leader, Deng Xiaoping. He...
You know, I should have clapped for Mao too. Let's hear it for Mao as well. Now let's hear what the crowd has to say about Milton Friedman.
You suck. You suck.
Jeez.
He came into power hoping to turn around this 150 years of humiliation in China, the decline of China as a superpower. Elsewhere in the
No, Deng Xiaoping was a part of the party under Mao. He was always involved in the party debates the whole way through, and he agreed with Mao. He supported Mao. He just wanted to open China up to slightly more private markets, right? And he was very, very clear that the policy, the reform and opening up policy that Deng helped design, that China would go forward with, would have been absolutely impossible without the industrial base laid under Mao Zedong. So China's rise to becoming an economic superpower would have been impossible without the socialist economic planning of Mao, which is what I mentioned a book earlier by Carlos Martinez called No Great Wall on the continuities of the Chinese Revolution. And this pamphlet is basically designed to debunk this idiotic argument. This argument that China was poor and struggling, and then they switched to capitalism, the magic elixir, and they became rich and powerful. No, in fact, the revolution is continuous, right? Deng Xiaoping did change things in China, and there were drastic changes made with the reform and opening up period. But China never went away from socialism. China's always been a socialist country with the idea of building communism. And the economic policies of Deng would have been impossible without those of Mao, right? So this is economic development that you can attribute to socialism. Socialism within a system of global capitalism dominated by Western finance capital and the Bretton Woods system. I mean, this is just lying. To say that the 10 years of Mao, the whole country was living in poverty and then Deng turned them into a superpower, you're just lying.
Region, China's neighbors had economies that joined the global economic party that was happening in capitalism, and they were thriving. They saw immense economic miracles and pulled millions out of poverty.
Jacob says it just, oops, wrong chat. Jacob says, oh my God, the pictures that he used of people in poverty were taken in pre-revolutionary China. No joke. You're talking about the people who were raised out of poverty by Mao, and you're trying to say that they were the people put in poverty by Mao. You liar. You liar. You just lied. I feel like Elon Musk right now. You just lied right there.
Deng specifically went on a visit to Singapore early on in his term, where ethnic Chinese had adopted the free market and they were thriving. He felt inspired. The Maoist economic doctrine that had failed was over, and it was time to see if China could rebuild its economy, experimenting with some version of capitalism. But he had to do this carefully so as not to disrupt the one.
And you see, this is the idealist liberal view of history. Capitalism's a magic elixir. Maoism failed. Maoism failed. Capitalism succeeded. Whereas in China, where they understand dialectical materialism, they say that parts of what Mao did was good, parts of what he did was bad, right? It's like a 70-30 thing, or that's what they say about Stalin. They say something similar about Mao, right? There are many different actions that Mao took that were good. There were some actions that he took that were bad, and there are some actions that were somewhere in between, and they could be improved upon, and we're going to try and improve upon them in the future. Right? That is a rational way to look at the world. That is a rational way to understand a country, right? As a mixed bag, because humans are a mixed bag in general. We're never going to be perfect. We're never going to be a complete failure, right? The idealist, moronic, liberal, 2-year-old toddler view of history is Mao's socialism failed completely, 100%. All of it was garbage and all of it failed. Capitalism's a magic elixir that's never done anything wrong and that makes every country super rich and prosperous. It's idiotic.
Party rule that China had created. So he decided to just focus on one little village, a sleepy village in southern China of just around 30,000 people, right across the border from the British-controlled Hong Kong, which at the time was thriving because of its hardcore capitalistic economy. Deng Xiaoping designated this little town as, quote, a special economic zone, where foreign companies could set up and invest in a very capitalistic free market. Hong Kong would sort of act as a bridge between Western businesses and this little gateway into communist China. It was still socialism, but with some Chinese capitalistic characteristics.
Holy crap, he said something true. He said something true. It's still socialism, but with some capitalist characteristics. Wow, you did it, Johnny Harris. I know it was an accident, but everyone, a round of applause for Johnny. Woo, said something right. Good job. The NGOs are going to take your funding away for saying that.
What happens next is arguably the most mind-blowing economic miracle ever to have taken place on planet Earth. This little sleepy village that was a special economic zone in China exploded from a little fishing village with little more than a few thousand people and some rice paddies to a massive city of over 10 million people. The average income went from $1 a day to over $30,000 a year.
That's the power of socialism, baby. I just wanted to say Shenzhen is where our friend Daniel Dumbrell is from. That's where he is a bar owner or a brewery owner. Shout out to Daniel.
This starts happening all over China. And meanwhile, Milton Friedman's back in the US being like, yep, told ya. Soon there were a bunch of cities designated in China for special economic activity, or basically capitalism in a socialist country. And more foreign companies flocked to China for its cheap labor. It became the
You can't just describe it as capitalism in a socialist country, though. It's a socialist country living within global capitalism that allowed some private capital in, which is heavily controlled by the party and heavily controlled by the people and heavily controlled by the state. So it's ultimately just socialism, but it's socialism based on the global conditions of global capitalism. And like I said, the Bretton Woods system and the US dominated financial system, which is why China's doing like the Belt and Road Initiative in response to the efforts of US imperialists. And if this guy ever actually read some Chinese scholars, he would know that everything they do primarily is aimed at counteracting imperialism, capitalist imperialism, including the reform and opening up.
world's factory. China joined this trend of other Asian economies and eventually passed them up to become the second largest economy on Earth. You can see this in a graph. This year, Asia will actually pass the rest of the world in accounting for more than—
No way. Johnny Harris's video does explain that he's losing funding. That's so funny. That is so funny. Yeah. It must have been that one thing that he said.
50% of global GDP. It is a massive economic transformation, and it explains why China has become so powerful. Okay, but wait. This is a very wonderful story about capitalism and its ability to lift millions of people out of poverty and to industrialize a country seemingly overnight. But there's another side to this coin that we need to talk about. I have two graphs I want to show you. They look like this. Okay, let's look at this one first. It's called the elephant graph. Do you sort of see why? Let's deconstruct this graph and try to understand what—
Gosh, this editing is just so good. Like, you know, how does he have editors and graphic designers behind him? And I mean, maybe you could say that money's just coming from his YouTube and coming from his ad revenue, but I would not be surprised if there were some NGOs or some institutions like Bellingcat who were giving this guy some cash to make these really well-produced videos. He has a whole team. Yeah, and maybe he does. Okay. Do you know, is there any evidence of him getting funding from like an NGO? He's got to be, dude. He's got to be.
this says about the past 30 years of the rise of China. On this axis—
He's been funded by some rich fuck. Okay. Yep. Called it.
is everyone on Earth ranked by their income.
Yes, this is exactly it, Jacob. This is exactly the argument they always make. If China does something bad, it's communist. If China does something good, it's capitalist. They'll never actually explain how, right? Whereas socialists who support China, we can go into the details about China's economic system, what China's doing, the Belt and Road Initiative. Capitalists just say, oh, them getting rich, that was capitalism, right? Oh, everything bad and authoritarian that happened in China, that's socialism, that's communism. Pure idealism. What all these gentlemen lack is dialectics.
Grouped into percentiles. So these people down here make an income that is the 10th percentile, the lowest 10% in the world, and then the 20th percentile, and so on, up to these people up here who are the richest in the world. They have an income that puts them in the 90th percentile. This axis here shows how much
Capitalism, socialism, communism, and fascism are all funded by the same bankers. So I wish I was funded by some bankers. Then I would be able to go grocery shopping more than once a month.
Growth in income these people have had over the past 35 years, basically during the heyday of shareholder capitalism and the rise of China. So you'll see how
communism was funded by German banker Engels. Yeah, his dad owned a factory. Capitalism creates the conditions for socialism to come about. That's the whole point of Marxism.
this plays out in just a second. Let's start plotting how much income growth each of these groups saw over the past 35 years. The bottom 10% saw their incomes grow by around 75%. Not bad. These are people who live in the poorest countries who make the lowest income in the world. The 20 to 30 percentile saw huge growth in their income, 125% and more over the past 35 years. This is like the new middle class in China and other Asian countries who saw huge income growth due to globalization. They did really well under this system. But then you start to get to the people in the 50th and 60th and 70th and 80th percentile. This is basically people who live in the middle class in the West. Their incomes have grown much slower, sometimes under 50% over the course of 35 years, which is little over 1% a year. Not very much income growth. And some of these people in the West have seen their incomes shrink, like the blue-collar workers in Detroit and the Rust Belt whose jobs disappeared to China. So far you can sort of see why this makes sense. The people in China who benefited from this mass industrialization saw huge benefits. And the people here in the United States and in the West who saw jobs go overseas to China saw a way slower growth in their income.
And who sent their jobs overseas, Johnny? It was the capitalists searching for more profit. But I thought capitalism was this magic elixir. Jesus Christ. I think we should be done with this video, guys. Well, this is the most replayed part. Let's watch this quick.
Capitalism also incentivizes and results in. If we're going to consider the effects of this version of capitalism, we have to look at all of its effects, not just some of them. So, what's the solution? Is it socialism? No, it's not. It is simply a new version.
Yes, it is.
Of capitalism, a reframing of how we think.
Is he saying that we should embrace Chinese capitalism? I'm down. If you want to embrace China's system and call it capitalism because it makes you feel better about your ridiculous, stupid ass argument that capitalism's a magic elixir, sure. As long as we start bringing people out of poverty the same way China does, as long as we stop allowing capitalists to outsource all our jobs as they send all our money to Ukraine for a proxy war. If you want to call it capitalism, sure, you can call it whatever the hell you want, Johnny. Whatever, I don't care. Let's just stop allowing capitalists to keep us all in poverty and exploit us all and send us all to wars for expansion. Eddie, check the description of the video to see where Johnny got his funding from. This is any type of capitalism. Sure. No, it's socialism. This video is a story about China, past to present, but in telling the story of the rise of China, it's impossible not to talk about fundamental lessons. Shut up. Ways to support Patreon. How I make videos. Using After Effects. Johnny Harris. Oh, he's funded by the New York Times. And Vox. Oh, Vox. That makes sense. Filmmaker and journalist. He's based in Washington, D.C. Oh, imagine that. He's based in Washington, D.C. You know who else is based in Washington, D.C.? Like 90% of NGOs. There's so many people in D.C. or so many propagandists in D.C. It's the hive. I flew over Washington, D.C. the other day, actually, for wrestling, and there were just these giant mansions everywhere, like houses with like their own ponds. I'm like, these are the people who run our country. These are the people who run our society, and they're giant mega mansions. Well, we're all working 10 hours a day and barely being able to put food on the table. And reporting on interesting trends and stories domestically and around the globe. Johnny's visual style blends motion graphics with cinematic videography. He holds a BA in international relations from Brigham Young, LOL, and an MA in international peace and conflict resolution from American University. What a guy. I do like his video. I like the visual style of his videos. I like the graphs and stuff. I just wish he wasn't talking out of his ass. If you listen to the last minute he says it, does he? Let's do it.
With me on this video, the Davos Summit happened this week, and World Economic Forum for partnering with me on this video.
You gotta be fucking kidding me. The World Economic Forum, no way. No way. Oh my gosh, not even like NGOs, not even some obscure NGOs. Literally the World Economic Forum. Like the face, like the core organization that represents the ruling capitalist class, that represents the richest, wealthiest bankers and shareholders in the world. That is who's funding this guy. The World Economic Forum. Dude, I thought it was going to be like some obscure NGO, some obscure Washington, D.C. NGO. No, literally directly funded by the World Economic Forum. Bruh.
To get a deeper look into the future of our economy. Thank you, World Economic Forum, for partnering with me on this video. The Davos Summit happened this week, and I'm really glad that I was able to be a part of it. So
He was at Davos, bro. What the hell? Oh, start the video with that, Johnny. Don't feed us 16 minutes of nonsense before you tell us that you're literally funded by the richest people in the world. That's crazy. I can't believe somebody at Davos who gets paid by the World Economic Forum would portray capitalism as a magic elixir. And he doesn't even talk about the conflict of interest there. Right? He's like, yeah, I know I called capitalism a magic elixir and said socialism's evil and capitalism's good. But keep in mind that I'm funded by the richest Wall Street shareholders and bankers in the world who run the world and overthrow any government that tries to move towards socialism. And they're paying me to be a propagandist. So just keep that in mind, that conflict of interest. He doesn't even point out, he doesn't even see the conflict of interest. It's just like, shout out to the World Economic Forum for funding this. They're meeting in Davos this week to decide how to run the world and decide which governments they want to overthrow and how they're going to spy on us, how they're going to maintain global capitalism and maintain exploitation. And I got to be a part of it. Thanks, guys. Dude, the fact that you didn't even realize how ridiculous it was to say at the end, just throw in at the end of your video, I'm funded by the World Economic Forum. It shows how clueless you are, how much of a stooge for the neoliberal ruling class you are. Gosh, so that's who's pumping out these videos. That's who's creating these videos with 4 million views and 3 million subs and channels with 3 million subs. The freaking World Economic Forum. Wow. 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 Just wow. Jacob, that was a great video. Thank you for sending me that. He even leaves a link to an article by the World Economic Forum about China. Of course he does. I should have known that he was using their rhetoric. He's using the rhetoric like of NGOs and the World Economic Forum and the Heritage Institute, the Heritage Foundation is a big Koch brothers funded NGO. They always talk about economic freedom in terms of freedom to exploit, freedom of corporate investment, right? That's what equals freedom for the Heritage Foundation, the World Economic Forum. And they literally do try and portray capitalism as this magic elixir. And they say that everywhere that Milton Friedman and his buddies went around the world, prosperity followed. And, you know, no matter how many times these arguments are debunked, they keep saying it because they're looking at things from the perspective of the bourgeoisie. Remember when I said it's like he's looking at things exclusively through the lens of the ruling class? That's because he was being funded by the World Economic Forum. So, you know, whatever is good for the ruling class, whatever is good for the exploiting class is what he's going to say is good, right? So he called China a prosperous kingdom when 95% of China was living in extreme poverty because the kings and the landlords were wealthy at the time. It's all just through that class perspective of the ruling class. Whatever's good for them is good for all of society. Whatever's freedom for them is freedom for the whole of society, while completely ignoring the interests and the conditions of the working masses. That's the Heritage Foundation framework that they view. I mean, that's just the capitalist framework that they view things through. But he was saying some things that I should have caught on to. Well, I did kind of catch on, but I thought he was funded by like the Heritage Foundation or some kind of NGO. I didn't think he would be directly funded by the most evil pro-capitalist organization in human history, the World Economic Forum. Eddie, I think I'm done debating liberals in my life. It's so exhausting and they're set in their ways. Our biggest obstacle is liberalism. Facts. That's why, I mean, Capital is called a critique of liberalism, right? And that's why it's so funny when Voosh, everybody's favorite Twitch streamer, Vaush, said that Marxism and communism is an extension of liberalism. He literally said that. It's like, no, it is a critique of liberalism and the foundations of liberal society, right? And liberals are ultimately people who embrace liberal society, right? They want capitalism. They just want it to be more diverse, right? They want more indigenous and black capitalists. They want to diversify exploitation. That's essentially what liberals want, but they support exploitation. And there are liberals you can win over, especially if they're working class liberals or like teachers. Well, there's a lot of liberal teachers who can be won over and stuff like that. But if you have like an upper middle class, fairly wealthy liberal, you know, even if they're a nice person, even if they're compassionate, good luck convincing them to be against capitalism, because capitalism gives them their privilege and wealth. So yeah, a lot of times I think there's more overlap between Marxists and American conservatives than there are between Marxists and American liberals. It's a case by case basis, and what matters more is their economic class, right? Someone in the working class from either political persuasion is always going to be easier to organize than somebody from the capitalist class. But, thank you for the super chat and interesting comment there. Maoist economic policy was working well, actually. Yes, it was. The economy grew about 10% a year. The temporary boom in agricultural production was based on science developed during the GPCR. Cultural Revolution. What is GP? Either way. Then it declined later during reform and opening up. The dismantling of communes was disastrous for the rural population. Now China reliant on food imports. That's probably Maoist, trying to argue that Mao's policies were better than Deng's policies. And it is sad that the commune system was kind of gotten rid of. China's not entirely reliant on food imports, but definitely more reliant on the global economy in general now. But yeah, like that's where I agree with Maoists 100%. Like the economy under Mao was really good, right? It industrialized the country, which allowed for Deng Xiaoping to say, okay, we have our industry. Where should we plop these special financial zones to, you know, help develop the economy on top of the industry laid under Mao? So to pretend like China was just in total poverty and chaos before reform and opening up, and then the magic elixir of capitalism brought everyone out of poverty, it's not what happened. And also there were negative things that happened with the reform and opening up, like the communes kind of got taken apart. You know, there's more capital in the country, so that led to like higher rent, things like that. So there were a few negative things that happened, even though it ultimately allowed the country to grow at an astounding rate. I have to run to the bathroom, and then we'll cover these sustainable cities. Eddie Liger Maoist, not quite, but I do love me some Mao. I just don't think Mao would agree with a lot of. I think Mao would support modern China 100%. Even though it's maybe not the exact path to socialism that he had originally envisioned. Socialism is all about adaptation and changing based on the material conditions to do what's necessary to construct a system by and for the working class. All right, this is a good one. Skip to the end a little bit. Enjoy, folks. I'll be back. Oh, shoot. There you go. There's me wrestling. I just muted myself. Enjoy that. I'll be back after I pee. Quit lagging, stupid thing. All right. BRB. Man, this is a good match for me. I really broke that man mentally and physically. I was watching the match while I was in the bathroom. Love your content, or love you, Eddie. You're an incredible content creator, and I hope to see you on the Deprogrammer, Hassan, or Mike from PA stream. Much love from Germany. Thank you, Tenzin. I hope to be on those programs eventually sometime too. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that. Okay. Let us now talk about sustainable city. So for whatever reason, people recently sent me some interesting videos about cars and about sustainability. At the same time that Biden is looking to basically control emissions, they're trying to crack down on emissions and say that car manufacturers have to, or can only, because this is just based on what the EPA has authority to do. The EPA can say, your emissions can't be over this level, right? And they can set it at a level that makes it so these car companies have to start producing electric in order to hit those emission requirements. And ultimately that's supposed to change how production in the auto industry is done. It's essentially a revolution in production if this were to actually go through. But of course, a lot of lithium mining and things like that still require fossil fuels, so electric cars aren't the answer. And actually, most of the electric car batteries are created in China, the vast majority of them. But the goal of the Biden mandate in the EPA is to make it so that 2/3 of all vehicles on the road, all cars, are electric by 2032. So interesting central economic planning there from Comrade Biden. Trying to move us towards electric cars built by China. But we do need to do something. I wish we would invest in like rail and trains, but I'm glad they're doing something, I guess. But a lot of the times when capitalist countries promise to do things about climate change, they're half measures at best. But when I was in, because this was a group project I did, I'm going to delete the names of my group members so I don't release their names to everyone. But when I was in college, I was in a sustainability class. It was basically like the politics of climate change and sustainability and eco-socialism. Our professor was a Marxist in this class. So I had to give a presentation about livable cities, cities that are sustainable. Just cities that are sustainable. And what I found was that there have been these experimental public housing projects where they build the cities based on human interaction and human connection. There's a lot of plants and wildlife, which is called the biosphere, which has been shown to be beneficial to human happiness. There's a lot of third spaces, which are places where people can meet and be in community with each other outside of the home. So like community gardens, parks, bike paths, things like that. There's not a whole lot of cars. There's a lot of greenery. And in these places, not only are they sustainable, not only are they more energy efficient than other neighborhoods, but the level of happiness is higher, right? People have more motivation. People have more energy. People are more content with their lives. So it makes perfect sense to design our cities this way based around, what's good for humans. But we don't. We design our cities based around what's good for big business, based around what's good for landlords, based around what's good for the banks. And a lot of our cities just look like gray, sprawled out. Maybe I should present this. Sprawled out. I don't even know what you would call this. Just absolutely gray. And there are tons of negative impacts to this, obviously. Obesity stems from this. Like the health of citizens was a lot better in the sustainable neighborhoods. This kind of city design leads to a lot of air pollution. It leads to a lot of traffic. Development is dominated by cars, which is one of the videos that we're going to watch, or that someone sent me today, is about how city design is based around what's best for cars, not what's best for people. We sacrifice a lot of public space to people. This is how cities are designed now. But there are these new forms of planning that are being developed that allow for more greenery, that allow for more earth, which is good for humans, like I said, to be interacting with the biosphere, and good for the environment. It takes up far less land, but it's based on planning, right? Planning is the process of deciding what to do and how to do it. You need central economic planning to do this. You need socialist planning to do this. So long as our economy and therefore production is dominated by private banks and corporations who only care about their own profit incentive, they're not going to design our cities, our neighborhoods, our houses in a way that's planned to be beneficial for us, right? The only thing that they plan for is making profit, right? That's the only thing that enters into their plan. How do we make more money? How do we maximize our profits, right? So there's no consideration of the people living in these cities when city design is carried out, for the most part. So this is just some academic stuff, but I want to find some of the examples of ego districts. So this is about living infrastructure. So building infrastructure like plumbing and sidewalks and roads, bike paths, without destroying the environment, without destroying the ecology, allowing for more plants and wildlife and biosphere to grow. And they're based on having less density of people too, not packing people into tiny little areas. There's many more sidewalks, and people are encouraged to walk, so that they interact with each other, spend time outside, spend time in the sun, spend time with the biosphere. And this is one of the examples. This is one of the places where they've tried this. It was a little city called Mole Hill. And this is public housing, right? So what's public housing under capitalism is like the projects. They pack you into these gray apartment buildings where crime and poverty and all these things are rampant. But they tried this form of public housing where they put people in these sustainable neighborhoods with community gardens and stuff. And what do you know? The people are way more happy. The people are less likely to live in poverty. They're more likely to have a job. They're more likely to be involved in their community, just because the environment that they're in, the city that they're in, is planned around it. There's another one called Digstown where they basically did the same thing. And here you can see a map of how things were planned. Obviously, it's not like a city where most everything's gray. You see there's a lot of ecology and plant life going on here, which, like I said, has been shown to be good for humans' happiness. But this is so rational, right? And then public transportation, obviously. Like, this is so obvious that this is a better way to do things, right? To have public transportation and to have cities that are designed to be livable, that are designed based on humanity. But we don't manage production based on what's good for humanity. We manage production based on what's good for corporations. And then I gave another presentation about sustainable cities for the Bernie campaign. Where to go? And this was also about rent control and how these sustainable neighborhoods were cheaper, not only in terms of rent, but cheaper to maintain than normal houses, right? Than houses owned by landlords. Like I said, these were public housing. So people were living in these experimental cities essentially for free, when most people living in public housing, like I said, are in the projects. So not only does it help with the environment, not only does it help make people more happy, not only does it promote community, and not only is it a mode or a method of production and a method of managing society that's based around humanity, not based around profit, but it also decreases people's rents massively, which have been on the rise for years and years and years. So again, it's just central planning. It's planning the economy, planning production to be what's best for humanity, to be what's best for society, not what's best for capital. And when you look at like the projects in an urban area, an impoverished urban area, versus like these forms of public housing that are designed to be better, it's not even close. There's no comparison there, right? Not only are the rents higher in places like the projects, but people are happier here. They're sustainable. All these benefits that come from central planning. So this is what made me think of that, and this is what made me find those presentations. Somebody sent this video in, actually, about trucks.
I make videos about how walkable cities are more efficient, more environmentally friendly, more financially sustainable, and just better places to live.
See, I told you. It's all the stuff I said.
So given these benefits, it's not surprising that cities all around the world are trying to build more mixed-use walkable neighborhoods and viable alternatives to driving. Unfortunately, as engineers, planners, and advocates try to repair the mistakes of the 1960s and build the cities of the future, there's a growing trend that could undo all of that hard work: the growth of SUVs and light trucks. I really don't think it's an exaggeration to say that if there's a positive goal that cities have for the future, SUVs fight against that. They're just bad for cities, really bad. If you're walking and you get hit by an SUV, you're 3 times more likely to die than if you've been hit by a regular car. And if you're in that regular car, you're more likely to die in a crash if it's an SUV. SUVs are more likely to hit people in the first place because they're big, unwieldy, and have poor visibility. SUV drivers themselves are twice as likely to be killed in a rollover than car drivers. SUVs make congestion worse because they take up more space on the roads, they have terrible fuel economy too, and the list goes on and on. And to be completely honest, I'm making this video because I'm absolutely fed up with the conversation around SUVs and light trucks. We're constantly being told that doing anything about the astronomical growth in the average size of motor vehicles would infringe on the freedoms of people to do whatever they want. But your freedom to swing your arm ends where my face begins, and SUVs are a giant punch in the face to everyone who doesn't drive one. In short, SUVs are oversized, ridiculous, unnecessary death machines that are literally killing people, even their own drivers. So let's look at why they're so popular. If you went back in time about 40 years.
So yeah, you see all the barriers that exist to building these walkable cities. I'm sure there's a huge lobby for SUVs and the production of these cars, but it's also partly consumerism. Like, people don't want to give up their cars, and I'm not saying that people have to give up their cars, but there's more rational ways to organize how our cities are designed that allows for more walking and more biking, which of course means less carbon emissions and pollution. And then there's public transportation, which same thing. And we could have high-speed rail connecting every major city in America. Right? You could have high-speed rail going from the Midwest to New York. Right? And I could go to New York on a train. But we refuse to do that because capitalism. We don't refuse to do that. Capitalism doesn't allow us to do that. I have to drive on the interstate all the time for work, and it absolutely effing kills me how many people I see driving a huge SUV or pickup truck with only one effing person in the vehicle. It definitely doesn't make much sense. Car dependent infrastructure is stupid. Yes. That's the other thing that's prevented us from moving to more walkable cities is everyone's used to driving cars. Right? And all of our cities are designed around cars right now. So it makes it difficult to transition away from that. But we could, with enough socialist planning and with, steady investments in public transportation that slowly replace those cars. But like I said, you have the auto industry, the auto lobby, you have people making millions and millions of dollars off of selling these cars. So the only thing the Biden administration can really do is say, let's try and make some of our cars electric. Right? When that's such like in a narrow plan for solving climate change and solving all the issues that our society faces, right? When you could be moving towards more public housing, these sustainable, walkable cities, could be doing a massive investment in public transportation that would create all sorts of new jobs. Right? Instead of that, it's like, oh, we can't give up our cars, so let's just make all the cars electric. Okay, I guess we could do that. I have an electric bike and it's great. Those are so fun. I love the electric bikes. Those are
If
awesome.
you've ever
And then here's one more video that people sent in. I just thought it was interesting that as Biden was talking about, you know, the EPA and moving to electric and stuff, people happened to send me a bunch of videos about cars and city planning. And then obviously I remembered my presentations that I used to give. So this is another one called The Link Between Bad Drivers and American Media.
ever watched the news in America?
Ooh, this is a good comment. Our cities are just the spatial expression of the logic of capital. Facts. The environment that we live in, our cities and our proximity to other people in the community is just an expression of the logic of capital. You got your individual family units isolated and separated from each other within each household where they each try and accumulate as much as they can. Facts.
Something you might have noticed is that a lot of stories involve danger. Brutal crimes, grieving families, police lights. If you watch enough of our news, you're going to come away thinking America is a dangerous place. And in a lot of cases, this danger is exaggerated. It's sensationalized. But there is a particular crime, something that creates an untold amount of suffering that the news seemingly does not care about. There is a lot of victim blaming when pedestrians and cyclists get hit on the road. Some of it is blatant. Some people might say, should have looked both ways. But a lot of it is more subtle. There was a study in 2017 that looked at how the news reports on incidents like these, and something they found was drivers more often than not get the passive voice treatment. For instance, instead of saying the driver hit the pedestrian, they might say the pedestrian was hit by the driver. This might not seem like a big deal, but on a subconscious level, it's really effective at easing the blame towards the actual offender.
So here's how the media enforces the logic of capital, right? Our cities are just the spatial expression of the logic of capital. Skyscrapers downtown are the expression of monopoly capital. Absolutely. And then the media just helps enforce that logic, right? It's your fault for being a walker or a biker if you get hit by a car. It's not our fault for designing the cities in a way where, you know, there's traffic and cars and pollution all the time and there's no room for walkers or bikers. So in that way, the media helps reinforce the logic of capital. And then, of course, you're advertised cars all the time. Like if you watch the Super Bowl, you're going to see at least 50 car commercials trying to tell you you need the newest, nicest, most expensive car. And it helps enforce this car culture, which helps enforce the capitalist city design. So very, very interesting stuff. Thank you to whoever sent those videos about city design in. Unfortunately, folks, I'm running out of steam. I don't know how much longer I can keep the stream going, so I'm going to call it here. I appreciate you all for being here. I appreciate the moderators. I appreciate everybody who sent in videos and articles to react to. Appreciate everyone who was here for the first time, everyone who sent super chats and things like that. Again, check out patreon.com/MidwesternMarks. Check out our Discord. Check out our book section on our website. And yeah, that's all I got for today. Great show, Eddie. Thank you. I'm glad you liked it. I'll upload some clips later. Thank you guys for hanging out. We'll see you next time. Solidarity and flex. Peace.